All right, so I'm here to tell you about the Levesque chop. I'm going to channel my inner therapist here, but what do you think of when I say to you Levesque chop? Do you think it's a sick dribble move? Are you like me and ask yourself who is Levesque? Do you think this is a distant relative to Machop Chol? Are you wondering why you're even here listening to this episode? If you're asking that last question, welcome. Maybe stick around a bit and see if we can win you over. Today, I will be telling you all about the Levesque chop. The context here is it is the third round of the US Open Cup between bitter rivals, the Portland Timbers and the Seattle Sounders. Now, we've covered the rivalry between Portland and Seattle in more depth in episode 265. So if you want to hear that, check that out. But I will still give you the Spark Notes version of it here so that there's context for the people listening to this episode specifically. So the history between the two sides begins all the way back in the 70s and 80s, with both sides participating in the NASL. The rivalry, like many other rivalries, has been sparked by the proximity between the two cities. As across most American major sports, the two cities are often the closest to one another. After the end of the NASL era, there was a hiatus for over a decade before the rivalry was reborn again in the A League in 2001. Their A League battles would last for 4 seasons, ending in 2004, with a playoff battle between the two sides that would see Seattle getting the better of Portland in extra time. Following 2004, the rivalry would continue under the newly named USL First Division. Along with the beginning of the USL First Division was their first meeting in the US Open Cup. The USL era rivalry between the two sides would end in 2008, with Seattle making their move to MLS in 2009. As Portland was lined up to also join MLS soon after Seattle's move, there were still many more rivalry matchups to look forward to. So now that we've covered that, let's get to the game. This third round matchup between the two sides was taking place at PGE Park in Portland. This was Seattle's first season in MLS, with Portland still in USL at this point. Because of this, Portland had to play the first 2 rounds of the US Open Cup. For this matchup to happen, Portland would have to play juggernauts such as Kitsap Pumas and Sonoma County Soul. Unsurprisingly, Portland won both of these matches 3-0. I actually had to rewrite this next part because I didn't know this was a thing back in the old USOC days. But Seattle actually had to play 2 qualification games before making it to the Cup as well. And they arguably had it tougher than Portland. The Cup would require participating leagues to participate in a qualification to trim down teams to 8 teams that would compete in the Cup. That meant Seattle had to face RSL and Colorado in order to just make the Cup. Seattle would stomp RSL 4-1 and beat Colorado 1-0 to qualify for the Cup. And just as an extra note, Portland was not required to play any qualification games because at the time, USL 1 had 11 teams, and 3 of those teams were not from the US, that being the Vancouver Whitecaps, the Montreal Impact, and the Puerto Rico Islanders. So Seattle was coming into this match with relatively good form, as they were only beaten once in their previous 11 games. Over 7 of those 11 games were draws, while Portland was in the midst of one of the best unbeaten runs in American soccer history. Portland during this run would end up going 24 games unbeaten in USL. The crazy thing is that they only won the league by 3 points. Let me get back on track though. I am gone completely off track too many times during this episode. So the game itself. The game kicks off, and if you were stuck in the slightest bit of traffic or trying to get a last minute hot dog before the game, or maybe you spent a little too much time in the bathroom, you'd have missed this entire thing. That's because 45 seconds, and yes, you heard that right, seconds into the match, Sana Niasi down the right flank hits a shot from outside of the boot into the path of the diving Roger Levesque, who scores to put Seattle up in the first minute. While the goal was super exciting for neutrals and Seattle fans, the celebration is what this episode is about. On the bus ride to the game, Nate Jaqua and Roger Levesque discussed the potential goal celebration that they would perform had either of them scored a goal. Lucky for them, they got to put the plan into action very early on. After scoring, Levesque runs off in celebration, but chasing after him is his teammate Nate Jaqua, who's looking to do their planned celebration. After finally catching up to Levesque, Jaqua pulls out an imaginary axe and begins chopping at Levesque's legs. In perfect form, Levesque stiffens up, acting like a tree, before falling over after being chopped down. The celebration being a clear shot at the Timbers for obvious connections there. With it being even better considering the game was in Portland. The only thing that would tarnish the legacy of this celebration would be if they had lost this game. So let's play out the rest of it and find out if they did. In the 27th minute, Jaco would help make sure the Sounders could secure this win by assisting a goal to Stephen King. No, not the author. Going into the half, down two, could be very demoralizing for the Timbers, but luckily for them, they wouldn't have to worry about that. As in the 43rd minute, Manju Keita would score past Casey Keller to make it a one-goal game. Belief for Portland heading into the half, and surely nerves for Seattle. While Portland had chances to level, the score would remain, and Seattle would eliminate the Timbers. Now the celebration can live on untarnished. Seattle would go on an incredible run in the Cup following this game by beating the KC Wiz, Houston Dynamo, and finally defeating DC United in the final to win the US Open Cup. This was the first US Open Cup championship for Seattle, but without spoiling too much about potential future episodes, it won't be their last either.